our men, America's men. 100 men we'll cast today, but only 3 with the Green Beret.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Maravilius America First show. And I'm your host, Ted Maravilius. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I would encourage you to videotape the show on your VCR because there's going to be a lot of excellent information on your politicians. And we're going to have a good guest tonight. Her name is Charlotte Iserbyt, and she is formerly with the U.S. Department of Education. And we're going to have her on after my monologue. So, what we're going to do right now is talk about 3 issues. One is the National Endowment for the Arts, and our congressman's vote on that. We're going to talk about Bill Weld's switch on gun control, and we're going to talk about the Somalia situation and that fiasco. Why don't we start with that fiasco in Somalia? This show, and yours truly, was warning about the Somalia incursion that we were embarking upon. I argued against it for 2 reasons. One was that we have no American national interest in it whatsoever. 2, I argued against it because for the first time in United States history, American forces were operating under the control and under the authority of a foreign entity, namely the United Nations. Let me read to you the United States Constitution. Yes, it was passed 200 years ago, more than that, but it's still the law of the land. And we read here in Article 1 of the United States Constitution, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to declare war. That's not the Congress of People's Deputies from the Soviet Union. It's not the United Nations Congress, the UN General Assembly. It's the United States Congress shall have the power to declare war. Now, in Article 2, Section 1, it states this. It's Section 2, Article 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy and the militia of the several states. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. Now, the President is not the United Nations President. It's not the President of Tasmania. It's the President of the United States. And Congress shall have the right to declare war. Not the United Nations, which was founded by 16 members of the American Communist Party and who has consistently voted against the best interests of the United States since its inception. The United Nations is an assembly and an amalgam of socialists and would-be dictators who, with their one vote, one nation power in the United Nations Assembly, have completely fostered socialism here in America and abroad. They have waged violence and destruction against the freedom-loving people of the former nation of the Belgian Congo. They have slaughtered hospital workers in that country back in the 60s in the name of peace and with American equipment and money. And what they're doing in Somalia right now is the same thing. They're going around shooting innocent civilians, killing them, all in the name of peacekeeping. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's peacekeeping that we're over there. Peacekeeping. It's world terrorism. It's globo cops. The American citizens who went over there and allowed themselves to wear a United Nations blue patch for the first time in history, in my opinion, sold out their country. I realize they didn't know what they were doing, but I'm sorry, ignorance is no excuse. I'll tell you, the enemy in Somalia is not most difficult warlord Aidid, whose son is a United States Marine, according to an article that I read by the liberal Carl Rowan. No, you see, Aidid is only trying to fight for his country. He may be a shady character, but that, ladies and gentlemen, nowhere in our United States Constitution does it say that we have the power to put pristine individuals into power around the world. That is not what the Constitution says. Our Army and armed forces are only supposed to be used to protect American vital interests. They are not supposed to be abandoned into some global mercenary force so that they can get shot up for no reason whatsoever except for to build a one world government or a new world order. It's absolutely sick. And I just want to, you all saw that picture of the American citizen that got killed, a victim of the New World Order. Ladies and gentlemen, let me read to you Carl Rowan, a liberal. Aidid is given the impression that he's a ruthless and a crazily destructive man. And yet, there's no reason to support such an accusation of warlord when you have communist butchers in China and Cuba killing Christians on the hour every day of the week. It is absolutely disgusting to single him out, and it's just a blind, brazen attempt to empower the United Nations against the United States Armed Forces. And in the Boston Herald, a Stake in Somalia editorial, it quotes Bill Clinton as saying, "We are in active consultation with our UN allies. We'll proceed through the UN as our troops there are part of the UN." Are part of the UN. Bill Clinton has abdicated his constitutional authority and that of the United States Congress as well. In doing so, I can safely say, legally, that Bill Clinton is a traitor, capital T. Under the Constitution, he should be tried and impeached by the House, impeached by the House and tried by the U.S. Senate for acts of treason. I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit extreme, but it is de facto and actual treason. It's against the United States Constitution. Interestingly enough, 2 days ago, the United States Senate voted 65 to 33 to turn aside a measure that would prohibit spending defense dollars on any United Nations operations in which U.S. soldiers were under the operational command of a foreign officer. In other words, the United States Senate said that it's okay for us to fund an operation where we send American citizens, American soldiers, away to a foreign excursion to help build the United Nations New World Order, one world government, which will destroy us in the end. And in doing so, we actually abdicate control of that guy who's fighting for us to the United Nations, to a foreign entity, to a foreign commander. In this case, there was a Pakistani general in charge. Any American who would allow themselves to have a blue patch and a blue helmet placed on them, which is the United Nations peacekeeping logo, peacekeeping, in my opinion, is a traitor in and of himself. If I was over there, if this is one of the reasons why I didn't join the United States Marine Corps, I love it, but I knew that they were going to try to use me as a global cop because all the indications pointed to it when Bush started talking about his fuzzy New World Order. Ladies and gentlemen, to allow yourself to be a global cop, in my opinion, again, is treason. If I was over there, I would be fighting with the AD forces against the United Nations terrorists. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but the United Nations is the tyranny and is the terror and is the treason, and it needs to be stopped. America needs to get out of the United Nations immediately, or this country will lose its sovereignty, will lose its control over the United States Armed Forces, and there will be terrorism all around the world, sponsored by your tax dollars at the United Nations. It's a sick institution. We need to get out of it quickly. Yes, I'm a little bit upset about this because this is treason. Patrick Buchanan, in an article, like Somalia, you love Haiti. For in Haiti this month, the drummer boys of global democracy may just pull off yet another debacle to rival the Somali disaster. At this writing, the first major contingent of 600 U.S. troops wearing UN blue berets to install a guy named Aristide, who I guess was an admirer of Fidel Castro. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a sick foreign policy right now and a very sick president. Let me just conclude this situation in Somalia by quoting another article by that great American, America Firster, Patrick J. Buchanan. Memo to the President, clean house, change course. Americans will not tolerate having their soldiers shot up in ethnic, tribal, or something conflicts for utopian abstractions like global democracy or the New World Order. We need to jettison Presidential Decision Directive 13, under which U.S. intelligence and U.S. troops are transferred to the United Nations, and state publicly that in the future no Americans will be sent into combat except under U.S. command. Universal applause would follow if this were the case. We need to inform the UN that giving our superpower status in the automatic headlines any third world government can realize by killing American soldiers, U.S. troops are not for peacekeeping, and parenthetically, I don't think they're for sale either. Trash can all those unintelligible addresses about the goal of U.S. foreign policy being enlargement of democracy and expanding the blue blob, that's the United Nations on the map. You know, this is first, the American people are anti-intervention. They certainly are. They are against U.S. military involvement where our vital interests are not at risk. They want foreign aid cut, that's right. Foreign commitments scale back in foreign countries to pay their own bills, fight their own wars, and defend their own frontiers. That's how it used to be, but we're not doing that now, and I think that's very sad. Okay, how much time I have there, Director? Not enough time, but okay. Quickly, Bill Weld, that ardent conservative, right. Bill Weld, whose only conservative issue left was support for the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, has abdicated even that small claim to conservatism. I'd like for myself to read the Second Amendment to you so that you know what I'm talking about, and so you can take this situation into context. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Second Amendment, not the 10th, but the second. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Not. In an article, September 30, 1993, Boston Herald, Bill Weld proposes gun control. Title of the article, Critics Rip Weld for Gun Control Switch. Weld calls for the ban of so-called automatic assault weapons such as the AK-47, Uzi, what have you, institute a Brady bill from Massachusetts that would establish a 5-day waiting period for handgun purchase. In other words, if you're a girl and you have a disgruntled boyfriend coming after you, threatened to kill you, you have to wait 5 days until you're able to protect your life. In other words, if he comes before and is able to reach you before the 5 days, you're dead. Just like in the LA riots, people needed guns to protect themselves, and because of a Nazi gun control law in California, they were unable to do so in many instances because of a very similar Brady bill type of gun provision. Besides being a gross violation of the Second Amendment, it is also a situation that will lead to complete government tyranny over an unarmed citizenry, exactly what the Founding Fathers said would be disastrous. In addition to that, innocent people. See, this gun control measure will only affect law-abiding citizens. Only law-abiding citizens will be affected because the criminals already have the guns. So if we have to wait 5 days, which we probably have to do anyways, you have to wait 30 days for, I think, an FID card to buy a rifle, people will die because of what Bill Weld is doing. And keep in mind that this is a guy who was endorsed by the Gun Owners Action League last year because he was pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights. He says he's an avid hunter. He will sell anyone out, Bill Weld will sell anyone out to further his liberal social agenda and will go with anything that goes with the tide. He'll stick his thumb in the air and he'll see where the wind is blowing. But ladies and gentlemen, as a quote from Mike Usino says, he said, that is Mike Usino, Gun Owners Action League, Bill Weld says he's not a politician. I tend to think that maybe, you know, it's not political. I tend to think that maybe it is. Of course, it's political. And according to Goldman, Michael Goldman, who's a Democratic consultant, said that the guy, Weld, will flip on any issue a poll tells him to. That is true. And I have to say that the Democrat is right there. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the same Bill Weld who pushed through Project 10 in our public schools. Project 10 will do this. It's a homosexual, according to Nancy Sutton of Family First, is a homosexual recruitment program under the guise of suicide prevention. Governor Weld appointed a self-proclaimed homosexual felon, I think his guy's name is David LaFontaine, as the commissioner of gay, lesbian youth to study the problems of youth suicide. It basically called for implementing homosexuality in the schools. At the same time, this was also incorporated into the Massachusetts Education Reform Bill, which, by the way, will destroy Proposition 2.5. You can thank Sally Kearns and the governor, Bill Weld, for destroying Proposition 2.5, completely going to raise your property taxes if you're going to like that, and at the same time, you're going to have worse education and homosexual indoctrination into the school. It's a sick thing. Homosexuals coming into your classroom saying that they want objects. Whew. Okay, that's really a smart thing to do. And along those lines, Bill Weld had a crackdown on abortion protesters. Let me read the First Amendment to you because he's also abdicating the First Amendment rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redresses of grievances. The First Amendment, by Supreme Court interpretation, has been applied to the states, and as such, Bill Weld's attempt to limit pro-life people from protesting in front of abortion clinics is destroying the First Amendment rights of these people to freedom of assembly. And so now Bill Weld is firmly against the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and who knows how many other amendments. And as such, it's intolerable. And to add more insult to injury, Bill Weld has just called for the diversion of cigarette tax money to aid gay students. Everyone clap for joy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Weld administration is diverting $450,000 from the increased cigarette tax, which is only supposed to pay for anti-smoking programs to make schools safe for gay and lesbian students. Okay, this is an article by Eric Fenstrom in the Boston Herald. Alan Safran, a spokesman for the Department of Education, said a little more than 1% of the agency's $33 million share of cigarette tax revenues will go toward ending gay harassment in the schools. The anti-smoking funds will be used to implement the recommendations of the Governor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth, which looked at ways to curtail the high rate of suicide among gay teens. Safran denied the department was using the money for purposes not authorized by the 1992 voter-approved ballot question. Quote Alan Safran, "The cigarette money can be used for comprehensive health education, and keeping schools free of harassment falls under the general rubric of physical and emotional health." You're a liar, Alan Safran. And what Bill Weld is doing by diverting money that was specifically supposed to go towards, smoking education and, the bad results physically and medically that result are now being diverted. The law stated that money can go to comprehensive school health education programs, and this is quotes, provided that such programs shall incorporate information relating to the hazards of tobacco use. And by diverting tax money to aid gay students and to prevent the so-called prevention of harassment of gay students, they are engaging in theft. They are doing something that is contrary to Massachusetts law, and there's a name for that. It's called illegal. Yes, that's right, it's called illegal. Bill Weld is now a criminal at large, and I think that someone should arrest him for violating the law that was passed by the voters last year. Besides being arrested, the man ought to be impeached by the Massachusetts State House of Representatives. If this tape is listened to by anybody in the Boston area, I hereby, Ted Maravelius, Republican candidate last year, call for the absolute and immediate impeachment of Governor Bill Weld for breaking the law by diverting cigarette tax money into aiding gay students in school to be prevented from harassment. Tax dollars, ladies and gentlemen, tax dollars being used. $450,000 for homosexual propaganda in the schools. Is that what you voted for when you wanted to see cigarette tax money go into education to prevent the use of cigarettes by teenagers? No, I don't think that's what you voted for. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Weld is breaking all sorts of laws. He is a lawless individual. He's probably just as liberal as Bill Clinton. He's, what else can I say? He's an outlaw. And he should be brought to justice. He should be impeached. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the law. It's the law. He's breaking the law. This is a guy who used to be the Assistant Attorney General of this country under Ed Meese. And he was very critical of Ed Meese because Ed Meese was a true blue conservative. This guy is a true blue gun-grabbing Nazi and a pro-homosexual anti-Christian bigot. Okay, how many minutes do I have left, producer? No, 5 minutes. I did try to save the best for last. 5 minutes does not do justice to this following segment, and I might have to run 7 minutes or something like that because this is very important. We're going to talk about the National Endowment for the Arts. That is a federally funded program, and as such, it is funded by you and me, the taxpayers. I read to you from the 103rd Congress, First Session, Calendar Number 166, Report 103-114, Department of the Interior and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. In other words, giving money to a federal program. Now, this is what it says. For this bill, estimates totaling $13 billion in new obligational authority were considered by the Committee for the Programs and Activities of the agencies and bureaus of the Department of the Interior, except the Bureau of Reclamation, and the following related agencies, among them National Endowment for the Arts. The Department of Interior funding bill included funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. It's very common that smaller departments get incorporated into bigger departments, and that's where they fund those departments, through the bigger departments. So in other words, this is a bill to fund the National Endowment for the Arts and, of course, other related federal agencies. How much money is to be spent on this National Endowment for the Arts? Well, there's varying figures. Here is 140 million stipulated. Right here is 145 million stipulated. It actually says here on page 120, the committee recommends a total of $170 million for the National Endowment for the Arts. So in other words, you have a lot of money going to the National Endowment for the Arts. I believe the final funding for the National Endowment for the Arts was something like 140 million. Certainly not peanuts to you and me. Do you know what I could do with $140 million? Yes, I know what you liberals are thinking about, but the fact is $140 million is being used, your tax dollars, to fund the National Endowment for the Arts. Well, what do they do? Oh, well, let's see. According to the sword of the Lord, among the displays of the artists that have been funded by the National Endowment of the Arts, for the arts, are the following. And, ladies and gentlemen, if there's any children listening to this or whatever, you might not want them to listen to this. A 3-foot mound of synthetic excrement. This was funded by your tax dollars. A dismembered sculpture of 2 women having relationships. A movie titled A Spy that portrays Jesus as a woman exposing her breasts. Are you a Christian out there? Listen to this. And a film by porn star Annie Sprinkle titled The Sluts and Goddesses Video Workshop, or How to Be a Sex Goddess in 101 Easy Steps. Your tax dollars are funding this, okay? But specifically, the specific funding measure that really is getting me boiled here is this. Let me read to you from the American Family Association, National Endowment for the Arts. Congress is set to refund the NEA at a time when the federal agency has created a national controversy. One recent grant, the NEA gave a $20,000 visual artist fellowship grant last year to a photographer, Joel Peter Witkin. One photo is of a severed human head called the Kiss. Mr. Witkin had a pathologist saw this human head vertically in half. The 2 halves of the same head were then turned together so that the man could kiss himself. Another photo is of a woman castrating a man. The severed genitalia of a man sitting on 2 small skulls is shown in another. These photos were taken prior to Witkin's receiving his grant. Well, does that make you shocked? If it doesn't, how would you like to visualize something like that? Thanks to Senator Jesse Helms, who did this on C-SPAN, we have the picture. It's right here. That's what your tax, $20,000, okay, was given to the person who generated this. $20,000. Next time your kid asks you for an ice cream, you said, we can't because we don't have enough money, you tell them that the NEA spent my tax dollars on this. Oh, who voted for this? Wonder of wonders. Who voted against zero funding an agency that produces such abominations as that? Yes, you guessed it. Our intrepid fiscal conservative Republican Congressman Peter Torkelson voted not to abolish the NEA. Worse, much worse than that, Peter Torkelson, on roll call number 339, July 15th, Congressional House Record, 1993, voted to fund the National Endowment for the Arts. Voted for final passage of that funding bill. Okay? Voted for final passage of funding bill that produced such items as this. Yes, cutting dead human heads and merging them together is what Peter Torkelson voted for. The roll call vote was 278 ayes, that's yes, and 138 noes. Peter Torkelson was joined by those intrepid fiscal conservatives, Gary Studs and Bonnie Frank. Now, what do those 3 have in common? Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is an abomination. Your tax dollars are being used to fund abominable exhibits such as fusing of a dead man's head together after it's been cut in half. In addition to that, ladies and gentlemen, let me quote that great American Senator Jesse Helms. Mr. Joel Peter Witkin received a $20,000 fellowship for a series of photographs such as this, but most of them are worse than this. Some of the photos are so bad that I would not have them on this easel. He was in the Senate. This was on C-SPAN. I would not have them shown on television. The NEA awards fellowships based on the entirety of the applicant's work and are meant to enable the artist to take time off, in the words of the endowment, to create art like this. Let us look at one more here. And I don't think I have this picture. This is Jesse Helms says this. This is a photograph of another cadaver's head. The photographer, this guy that we're talking about, scooped out the brains and everything else and made a flower pot out of it. Then he took a picture of it, and as I say, this photographer, Mr. Joel Peter Witkin, received $20,000 of the taxpayers' money in a fellowship. Ladies and gentlemen, this is quite unbelievable, and besides Peter Turkson's other anti-family votes, such as parental consent on abortion, taxpayers' consent on taxpayer funding on abortion, fetal tissue research on abortion, and government-sanctioned homosexual marriages in the District of Communist, D.C., Columbia. With all of these, in addition to all of these warped views of Peter Turkson, we have him funding exhibits from people like that. And ladies and gentlemen, if you call that fiscal conservatism, then I just don't understand it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is unbelievable that we have a congressman like that, and I think it's quite serious, and I think it's about time that someone thinks seriously about running against him, either in the primary or as an independent. And I'm sorry, but that is absolutely sick. There's no need for an NEA whatsoever, not to mention funding anti-Christian exhibits such as this. I can't show you half the pictures on this television station because I'd probably get arrested for pornography or something like that. It's awful, and I wanted you to be aware of it because you're not going to read about it in the newspapers. Thank you. We're going to join Jim Morose in a 5-minute discussion, I think, on outcome-based education, and then we'll be joined later by our guest from the department, formerly of the Department of Education, Charlotte Iserbyt. Back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Jim Morose with today's commentary. Today I'd like to just focus on a series of issues that kind of would bring us right into today's present situation. I'd like to talk about the Constitution. This is our Constitution. It's a very thin document, very thin, and it's been around for over 200 years. This document is the guiding light of this country. All our elected officials are elected to serve and protect this document. And basically this Constitution is to protect we the people from they the government. The people need to have their personal liberties and freedoms, and that's the sole intent of this Constitution. I'd just like to take an excerpt from our Pledge of Allegiance. We are one nation. This represents our nation. We are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And this thin document is its premise, its base, its principles are all derived from our Creator, which this Bible is the inspired word of our Lord. And this document is nothing without being under the Lord. And the further this nation drifts and is led and is pulled away from the basic tenets of the Bible, which is the foundation of the Constitution, the more chaos and confusion will ensue. Don't have to believe me. I feel that way. There are books. The Myth of the Separation of Church and State. This details historically and factually how this thin document depends on the principles and the morals that are derived in here. When our school systems are pulling the 10 Commandments off the walls and putting up demonstration posters on how to put condoms on and where to get them and how to get them, and that's all they're focusing on, there is something wrong. Our leaders are supposed to be protecting our liberties and freedoms and giving us the freedom to live our lives the way we need to and to bring up our children the way we should you, all of us as individuals want to bring our children up. I'll give you a few examples of what's happened in other states. And I'll just read this quickly. This is the legislative tyranny, this article is entitled. The Utah Journal reported 5/7/93 that there is presently a legislative resolution before the Kansas State Legislature which reads, whereas public schools have become the primary institution for the rearing of children and the transmission of values, and whereas families, churches, and other social institutions are no longer able to successfully fulfill those responsibilities, therefore, public schools should be the principal caregiving institutions in this state and shall henceforth exercise final decision-making authority on all matters. Ladies and gentlemen, that's just one law from across the country, but guess what, folks? We have a new bill in Massachusetts, the Education Reform Bill. They're all tied together. They've already had theirs, and it's led to this. We've got the startings of ours. We don't know what it means as local school committees, our local leaders, town selectmen. They don't understand the law. What are we going to do? It's going to get worse because today, right now, there is a federal law, the Education 2000, being passed or being debated in Congress starting the end of this week and next week. We've already lost control at our local level. We got to follow the state laws now, and now we got to get into a federal. We're going to have to jump through federal hoops. The hoops are getting smaller, and the flames are getting higher. We can't keep up. We've got everything's coming at us. Media all over the place. This is just a week and a half's worth of information. How are we supposed to keep up with this? They're passing laws left and right. We don't even understand what they are. But in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I think our representatives, our legislators are not representing the fact that we need our freedoms. They're passing laws, they don't understand them, and we're supposed to abide by them. I just wish that you would all contact your representatives, your congressmen, your senators, and ask them what's going on. Thank you, and good day.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Ted Marvilius America First Hour. Joined here with me is Charlotte Isabet from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Research and Improvement from 1981 to 1983. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here in Danvers. Not far from home, really.
Well, that's right, from Maine, right?
I'm from Bath, Maine.
Okay.
It takes about 2 hours to get down here.
Okay. Incidentally, we're going to talk essentially about education, primarily outcome-based education, what we've been trying to oppose here in Danvers. I really come to the point where I think our guest probably has more knowledge about outcome-based education than any person in the United States. I guess the U.S. Department of Education office where you were at, Educational Research and Improvement, was actually where OBE started from.
Oh, absolutely, yes. No, that's the office that, and it didn't just start when I moved in there. They had been working on it. They've been working on outcomes-based education since 1970.
Yeah.
And it really is mastery learning. It's B.F. Skinner's program learning. He was the one who said I could make a pigeon a high achiever by reinforcing it on a proper schedule. And that's exactly what it is. It's the best way to define mastery learning outcome-based ed.
So it's like a dog, training a dog.
Yes, and I remember, it's very dangerous because I remember training my dog, and the phone rang. I was in the field with my dog, and the phone rang, and I went across the street to talk to one of our friends about education, I guess, and I must have been on a half an hour, and I left, and I thought, oh, my dog. Poor dog, so where's my dog? So I went over, and there she was. She was only 7 months old. She was still sitting there waiting for me, right? I had trained her, and this is very, very effective training, this kind of Skinnerian, Pavlovian training, and it's used by all totalitarian governments. It was used by Hitler. I have a page out of Mein Kampf which mentions mastery learning, and it's definitely used all the time. It's Pavlov. It's the Russian system. And the basic thing is that I had thought in the beginning with outcome-based ed mastery learning, it would be mainly used for changing children's values and for many skills in math and science, which is just disgusting. That's a deliberate dumb down. But what I found out, that when you have all the corporations, the big multinational corporations pushing it, and the Republican governors, even more than Democrats in many cases, it is the system it's the Pavlovian Skinnerian training system for the multinational corporations to rip off profits in the global economy. And I know that's true because I have quotes from different professors like Anthony Ettinger at Harvard. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I was never meant to get a hold of this. But it's an article where he presented a paper at an international telecom conference in Florida about 12 years ago. And he said, what's wrong with comic book level? We don't need kids to be able to write well and to be able to, with a flourishing handwriting or whatever. What's wrong with comic book level? And he goes along with Thomas Sticht, who's now on the Secretary's Commission for Achieving Necessary Skills, SCANS, which came in under Bush.
Necessary
Thomas
skills.
Sticht is an educator who worked at in the same Department of Education I did. He's been there 20 years, who said, we only want children who are trainable. We don't need to give them the basics. They've got to be trainable and manageable, and that it is more important to change their values than to teach them reading.
Now
That's what they're looking at.
I think I read that recently in the New American.
Yes.
And incidentally, the front page is about outcome-based education. I believe the article was written by Bill Jasper.
Right.
And actually, just a quote from Bill Jasper, he said something to the effect that OBE is out to recast the schools as change agents which prepare human robots who can be trained and supervised to perform menial tasks
Exactly.
to serve the demands of a global economy.
Exactly. Good for Bill Jasper. I mean, he has a tremendous understanding of this. And I think, people can say, oh, that's a conservative viewpoint. Well, if it is, good for the conservatives. But there was one of the gentlemen on the Regents board in New York State, when this went before that board, he made a wonderful comment, and he said, our schools aren't employment agencies. Now remember that, folks. Are our schools meant to be employment agencies? And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the use of the schools by the for the global economy. And it's not to help educate your child in history, math, science, whatever, or to be a good dancer or this or that. It's for the good of the state and the good of industry.
Charlotte, just to let you know, just for our Danvers viewers, I don't know where I'm looking at. Can you people see me out there? Can you see me on the screen? Okay. Just want to make sure, because I want to let you know that the New American article on outcome-based education is being placed in the Danvers library. It's actually there now, and you can go there. It's in the magazine section. It's the first floor, and take a look at the article. I believe our guest supplied a lot of information for that article. And
I did a lot of faxing to Bill Jasper, but I have to say, how anybody could put anything together as well as he did on that, with the amount of research that I provided him with, I mean, I could never have done it. I mean, he's just a genius.
I have to say, Bill Jasper is a genius, and he's just concluded a tour on the United Nations, warning about the dangers of it in a book called, I think, UN Global Tyranny, something like that.
Yes, it's a wonderful book.
It is. And actually, related to the United Nations, why don't we get into this thing that we were talking about earlier before the show?
Okay. Well, the United Nations is our problem. It's not Danvers School Committee or Boston or it is Washington, because Washington, through treaty law, when we joined the United Nations, our nation was put under the UN, and any UN convention, treaty, charter takes precedence over the United States Constitution and any state or local law. So we, in effect, gave up our sovereignty in 1945 when we joined the United Nations. Most people don't know this. This is why they can send our men off into any war. A lot of the left-wing protesters of the Vietnam War, who now support the UN, they don't even know that the Vietnam War was a UN war. And every war we've had, Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf War, my son was in the Persian Gulf War, and he sent me back his last letter home. He was in a very, so I have a real feeling for this, real dangerous operation where they were told that they weren't going to come back. He was in that war, and then of course with Somalia, now Haiti, and so these wars couldn't possibly, our boys couldn't possibly be sent out like this if we were not a member of the United Nations. And it's very simple to get out of the United Nations. Yeah. If the American people would just get off their duffs and stop believing that anybody says, we want out, are crazy kooks. Let me make a point. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was the great Russian dissident, the fine writer, and he was put into a mental institution, you know, and he and all his types were put into the mental institutions in the concentration camps. And he was a genius, and he was an intellectual, right? And I always say to people who say we're kooks and we're crazy and everything else, I say, good, thank you. I'm very happy to be joining the likes, not myself necessarily, but all of us who are saying these things and being called kooks. We're joining the likes of Solzhenitsyn and all of these wonderful intellectuals who understood what you have to do to remain free and understood the dangers of socialism, communism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. So if people want to call us that, I consider it a compliment, because these are the people that the Russians, the Soviets, put in jail for speaking, and they were the intellectuals. Now the guys out there like your Governor Weld and all, they think they're intellectuals. Well, you know what? They went to too much college, folks. Too much college, too many degrees. I tell you, they're brain dead. Give me a plumber, give me a mechanic out there. Honest, I always used to say, used to bother them so much with the school board. I'd say, look, next time around, let's get all plumbers on the school board. No more degrees allowed, because they don't see straight. They can't see anything straight. But anyway, and the UN issue, United Nations issue, is the issue of the most importance. And nothing else is important as long as that is allowed to stand. You can fight abortion, you can fight the education system, you can fight gun controls, you can fight everything. But that it's not going to do any good as long as you don't attack the root, because if we go into a global government, which we're doing right now, we're really into it, a merger with the Soviets, it's absolutely taken place. There's no question about it. They call it Russia now.
Rowan T. Gaither called that 30 years ago.
30 years ago, Norman Dodd was told, and he was not a right-wing nut. He went to Andover, Yale. He was with a big banking company in New York City, and he was told by the head of the Ford Foundation that the White House was looking for a merger of the United States and the Soviet Union, and they would do it through funding of the foundations. And folks, you better believe that. That's another right-wing conspiracy story, isn't it? Yeah, we've got to be nuts. But ask Solzhenitsyn, he probably knows that story, and it's not a story; it's the truth. And now we're waiting, and all of us who've been warning people are very tired now, because we have to speak constantly. I have to travel all the time, fly all over the country. I can't clean the house. I can't do nothing. I can't take care of my dogs. There are a lot of things I like to do. I can't do it because all of these people in our communities, Danvers surely couldn't be any different from my community. We're all the same. They all think we're crazy. Well, they're going to find out very soon that they're letting their children and grandchildren down, because they are being had. Our country is being taken right now. And if, you know, folks, it's not tomorrow. We're on borrowed time. And I guess the good Lord up there has decided that maybe he's going to give us a little extra time. But if we work 24 hours a day to try to stop this thing, just 10% of our community, we could bring it up, we could turn it around. But you have to get out of the UN. You have to get out of the UN.
Charlotte, what a joy to hear that. I mean, you know, the reason why I think a lot of people aren't voicing that, number one, is somewhat, it is cowardice, one. But number two, it is plain old-fashioned ignorance. If you go to school and things are omitted from you, if you don't know the history of our Constitution, if you don't know the history of the United Nations, how are you supposed to come up and say, oh, the United Nations is the problem? Because the media is not telling you this.
No.
And if it is the case that the media is not telling you this, and you don't know it from your history, how are you going to know it? So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're at all skeptical, do the research yourself. Don't let Dan Rather tell you about it. Don't let the Washington Post tell you about it. Don't let the Boston Globe or the Salem Evening News tell you about it. Don't even let the Danvers Herald tell you about it. You do the research for yourself, because this is not intellectual discourse, this is survival. And it's really true. And you kids in the high school, don't let yourselves become manipulated by robots. Teachers, please be skeptical of your administration. Don't let yourselves be used as change agents to manipulate the minds of your students. Take a stand. Please take a stand. The Founding Fathers did 200 years ago. We've been lax, but we have to take a stand now. Incidentally, I'd like to interject. I first became aware about you, Charlotte, when I read your article in America's Future, an excellent organization, and your article was entitled Soviets in the Classroom, America's Latest Education Fad. I just want to let you know it was an excellent article. and it's an excellent organization. They have a pamphlet on the New World Order. Incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to have any information about this, any questions, please give me a call at my new house number. I just got married.
Congratulations.
777-9340. Let's talk. Go down to the library, get an OBE magazine. I just wanted to let you know that. Yeah, write to me. I can get you in touch with these organizations. Incidentally, speaking of organizations, weren't you recently on the Marlon Maddox show?
I was on yesterday and the day before, which was wonderful. The first day, it was great, an hour and a half, and then Marlon wanted me on again, so I was on yesterday on very much these subjects.
Well, we have a couple more minutes left.
Yeah, no,
what other concerns do you have?
I think that my concerns are probably minor compared to the concerns of all of us right now. We should be focusing. You have to focus. We can talk about philosophy until the end of the world. I would like the people out there to call their senators and immediately 202-224-3121 and tell them to vote no on Senate Bill 1150. Now, Senate Bill 1150 is the Education Reform Act, basically. It's called Goals 2000. And this will codify every single thing that parents have been fighting for the past 30 years. Illegal privacy-invading questionnaires, revolting sex education, look-say reading instruction, critical thinking, which is nothing but criticizing your family and your country, etc. It will carve in stone. It will have our children having to do community service. They've already started it in North Carolina with one of the design teams put together by the private industries, right, under George Bush's New American School Development Corporation. One of the design teams down there called for 3-year-olds doing community service. So you get them early, not third graders, 3-year-olds. It will call for community service. It will call for all the school-based clinics and all, which will be lifelong folks, not just the kids, if you think you're going to escape it. It's lifelong learning for everybody in your community under the umbrella of the school district. The complete politically correct brainwash will be mandated through OBE, which is Skinnerian Mastery Learning, which we're dealing with at local level. So if it doesn't pass at the local level, they'll get it at the federal level. And you also have to remember this. They want to get vouchers in now. That's the most dangerous thing on earth, vouchers and school choice. But they're very smart. If they don't get it, they're going to use the charter school concept, which, of course, right here in Massachusetts, your governor is very interested in putting Chris Whittle in there and the Edison Project, which would take over schools that they say are non-performing, which are probably going to be the ones that don't want to put OBE in.
Right, exactly.
So be very careful about charter schools or vouchers. It sounds good, but that's the only way they can control and have a smoothly functioning global education system, if they can sew them all up with federal money.
Well, that's the thing. Until I read this, can I just see that newspaper that you have? What is it called? Free World Report?
Oh, yeah, Free World Research.
Yeah, Free World Research. Excellent paper. I didn't realize that vouchers for private schools was a bad idea. I was like, hey, that's great.
Yeah.
Personally, I think, in lieu of the fact that government handouts such as a voucher for private education does mean private control, like what they did to Bob Jones University and,
it means public control.
And the other Grove City College. It means public control. You might think it's an extended argument, but I kind of think you're right, and it's going to mean federal control. What we should have is towns saying no to have their property taxes fund public education.
You know what they should do? You should just stop paying your property taxes and put them in escrow, because then they can't get you, and say, look, and when they have you signing contracts now, which they're doing, the parents have you sign a contract that their child will do such and such in school and behavior and all, I say, you go to the school and you draw up a contract for the school. You will teach my child to read. You will not invade my child's privacy. You will teach my child mathematics skills, etc., and not all this OBE. You will not teach my child like my child's an animal with OBE and mastery learning. And when they sign off on that, you say, okay, folks, I'll sign off on this.
Okay.
Because parents, look, just don't be partners with the government.
Oh, boy.
Your God-given rights had nothing to do with the government, and you're just falling in bed with the government, with parents as teachers. Teachers going into your home teaching you how to bring up your children. That's part of Goals 2000.
Think about it.
That's part of Goals 2000. Goals 2000 is a total socialist communist takeover of the American school system. And Lenin and all of them and Hitler knew that you take a country through the schools.
Also,
you don't need tanks. You take it through the schools.
Lenin said that we will give the United States the rope with which to hang themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, I was going to say something. Goals 2000. It is going to come up for a vote soon, and you really ought to say something. Community service, which is forced, forced employment for the state. What is the difference between that and Hitler's Third Reich?
Oh, it isn't, but it's the Soviet system.
Okay.
They're putting in a nutshell, they're putting in the Soviet polytech system, which is mainly for the benefit of the economy, and all the kids have to have the same viewpoints, etc. That's what they're putting in. And no grades, no nothing. Don't forget this. The Soviets use mastery learning. They don't use all the grades and testing either. It's very important. I have all of this documentation here that I sell this packet for $25 to parents trying to fight OBE. These are all the educators' authentic documents. In fact, one U.S. Department of Education document that says that OBE, mastery learning, is a dumb down for the bright kids. Out of their own mouths, parents out there who think it may be good. In here is a document that says that the bright kids will move backwards. They can't move forwards with OBE.
Well, what they do is, unless, you know, the dumbest, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it, or the slowest person in class has to be brought up to a certain level until the brightest kid can go forward. Right. In other words, they all have to achieve a B or an A in order to go forward. And as Samuel Blumenfeld says, who was the first guest on the America First Hour, said that this is the dumbing down of America. In Riverside Elementary School, folks, in Danvers, there actually are no more, I'm not talking about grades, but grade levels. Right. First grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. And it is as a result of the OBE system. And the mindset is that they're just going to group everyone together, throw a lot of gobbledygook, indoctrination propaganda at them, and then just say that, of course, they've achieved mastery learning or OBE. And why don't you tell me, if I've heard of some specific programs in Oregon and Pennsylvania where some employers will not hire students if they haven't successfully passed OBE.
There's a bill, and whether it passed in Oregon or not, I think it did, that says that if an employer hires an individual, a student, without a certificate of mastery from the public school system or the charter school system or the private school system that's taking federal money, tuition tax credit, that child, that corporation will be penalized, will be fined. So think very, very hard about OBE and all of these things. Let me point out one thing, that this goes back 200 years. The takeover of the world, basically, world government goes back 200 years to, I have a wonderful old leather-bound book, 1798, by a Scottish professor in Edinburgh, and he explains how the Illuminati had to re-educate the children of the royalty away from religion, away from patriotism. It says it right in there. They even talk about the world community. They talk about dropping borders, changing the children's values from the religious values to those of the state, the humanistic, I make my own decisions, no right, no wrong. That was all planned 200 years ago, even, you know, right at the beginning of our country. And there have been people in high places all the way through, including the left-wing foundations, Carnegie, Rockefeller, etc., then going into the UN, that was the big step there. Department of Education, which connected us internationally with, once we had a department, it's like a ministry, it connects with all the other ones. And when I was in the department, I saw all the grants and contracts in my office, millions of dollars going to University of London, out to Pacific Circle Consortium, all the ones going out to do experimental work on our little children in the schools, parents not knowing whether to do this work to see how do you change the children's values. I have all that documentation. And that's why I'm on a bandwagon. So if you think that your local school is any different and hasn't been used, you've got to think again. All the schools in America are controlled by the U.S. Department of Education through research. 90% of the funding of education research in this country is federal funding, came out of my office. And research means teacher training, testing, teacher testing, student testing, curriculum development, all technology, computers, every single thing except school buses, teachers' salaries, buildings, etc. is paid for. It's the blood, comes out of research. It may be a little bit of money, but that little bit of money controls exactly what goes in your kid's head. And you've got to realize that maybe your principal doesn't even know that. I have the piece of paper because my boss went to Congress to get the the money to run the budget for our office. And he told them that. He said, you may not think we're important because we only get a little bit of money, $35 million out of $35 billion or whatever. But we control every single bit of what goes on in the schools aside from desks, etc., those things. We control the philosophy, the blood of humanistic education, world government education.
Can I just say, you might think it's a distended argument to say that, some of this was happening back 200 years ago. Whether you think it's a continuous thing or not, the fact is the founder of our country, George Washington, specifically warned about the founder of the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, a conspiracy is nothing less than people getting together to plot something that's not good. I mean,
Yep.
John F. Kennedy, if you don't think that there was a conspiracy there, then forget it. You're brain dead.
What you just said is very interesting, because this book I've mentioned, Proofs of the Conspiracy, this leather-bound book by John Robeson, the scholar,
yes, yes.
was written and was given to George Washington.
Oh, I didn't know
Yes,
that.
George Washington had this book, and it was actually, the book was published in Philadelphia.
Oh.
And it's the most incredible book, and when I read it, it's just deja vu. I mean, how on earth can they, it's just like reading out of a global education textbook for our kids right now. USA sovereignty no longer necessary. Love your neighbors, global
citizenship.
community, group projects, no
Yeah.
grades, no individuality, no competition. That's all mastery
Yes,
learning, by the
yes,
way. Politically correct viewpoints. Of course you need that, or you might have a revolution, huh? We got to get all the kids to believe the same things. I wouldn't want it if it was a conservative agenda. What's wrong with the liberals out there? We might just by some chance, miracle, get in power someday, and they'd have to have our agenda, and I don't think that's American. It's not American for the schools to teach a particular politically correct viewpoint. They've gone after this in the universities. You see a lot of writing about it. But folks, have you noticed how they never mention that the same thing's going on in kindergarten?
Well, you know what? I mean,
Same thing's going on in kindergarten, politically correct indoctrination.
at the founding of our country, illiteracy was almost like 100%. Extremely
Excellent.
literate and excellent education,
Yep.
and government did not really have a part in education. When we gave government over to teaching our children, it was a mistake. At first it was okay because they were led by good Christians,
Yeah.
but then the humanists took over, and it's about time that we get out of it. Christians ought not, in my opinion, to send their children to public schools if it's at all possible, but in the meantime, you need to know what's happening at your public schools.
Yep.
Charlotte, you've just been a tremendous guest. I want to invite you to a future show, and I hope you'll
Good.
come down for that.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Extremely
I really
interesting.
enjoyed this. You've had some awfully good questions.
Thank you.
And just a little thing, they say Americans are not bright enough. I'm often told, don't tell them everything, Charlotte. They're just not ready to hear it. Well, folks, I say, you're very bright. God gave you a big brain up there. You got to stop believing the media. You are perfectly capable of understanding everything that I have said today. And don't let people tell you, once you're convinced, don't let people tell you to shut up, because Americans can't understand. Maybe the college-educated ones can't understand, but I'll tell you, all those plumbers and electricians and people out there understand very well, and that's why they're opposed to NAFTA.
Yep.
And that's why they're opposed to world government. These guys, I used to be a Republican. I don't know what I am anymore, I tell you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Charlotte. Tremendous.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my number is 777-9340. May God bless you. Call Peter Torkson and tell him what you think about voting for people dividing heads in half of dead people and paying for it with U.S. taxpayers' dollars, your dollars. Thank you, and God bless you.
Okay.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a gold dry. The interest is up and the stock market's down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, a woman and the kids and the dogs and me. I got a shotgun, a rifle, and a four-wheel drive, and a country boy can survive. Country boy can survive. I can plow a field all day long. I can catch catfish from dusk till dawn.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this, the Ted Maravillas America First Hour. Tonight's guest will be Joe Spina of WESX and radio personality. He will be discussing political topics around the North Shore and elsewhere, and we encourage you to tape this program, whereas this will be very valuable for information which you will not necessarily acquire in the daily newspaper or otherwise. I'd like to begin with my monologue. We have first on the schedule OBE update from Virginia, the state of Virginia. For all of you who think that OBE is just a Danvers, Massachusetts concern, I have in front of me a news article, and what it does is it recounts the story of outcome-based education statewide in Virginia. And let's just see if this is an innocent educational reform proposal that is supposed to be just widely accepted by everyone without even a question as to what are these outcomes that students must satisfy, state outcomes that students must satisfy in order to get a diploma and to actually work in the future. They're going to require businesses to make sure that they hire only people with OBE diplomas. Okay, now I assert, and others, that OBE is nothing more than a politically correct indoctrination mandate that your sons and daughters will have to reverberate in order for them to graduate. Now, that is an attack not only on the local autonomy of the parents, but also an attack on children's minds. It's just an assault. And that's what concerned the residents of Virginia. And I read this to you. Virginia's New Age education is dead. On Wednesday, Governor Douglas Wilder killed the world-class education plan hatched by his own appointees and so headed off a controversy that threatened to become a hot election issue this fall and next, when the governor may find himself running for the U.S. Senate. Now Democrats won't have to try to defend it, and angry parents may not have to devote so much energy to fighting it. Now you see here, outcome-based education was categorically defeated in the state of Virginia. Now my question to you is, does that not send some type of warning bell in your mind as to what outcome-based education is if an entire state and a liberal governor just canned it? Why? Why is there concern? Don't forget where you heard it first. Here on the Ted Maravillas America First Hour, we had an expose on my first show on outcome-based education, wherein I shared with you the memo that I intercepted when I was a substitute teacher at the Danvers High School. And just keep in mind also some of the criteria that they want your children to possess in order to graduate. It appreciates the concept of global interdependence. Camera, get a shot of my shirt over here. Okay? This is what they want. They want complete allegiance to the United Nations, to the environmental wacko hysteria that they want to try to put on you, all of the so-called UN covenants on rights, which is nothing more than socialism and anti-Christian bigotry. And, you know, stuff like tolerates and appreciates diversity, including lifestyle, that's nothing less than homosexual indoctrination. And that's dangerous. If they want to believe in that, that's fine. In my opinion, the property tax ought not to be used for public education, like in, I believe it's Michigan or Wisconsin, a proposal was just passed that forbids the use of property tax money for local education. That's what I want to see happen here in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, our socialist state representative Sally Kearns and Governor Weld helped to pass the Massachusetts Educational Reform Bill, which basically mandates outcome-based education in so many words in all of the communities in Massachusetts. And it is something that is just going to absolutely destroy the autonomy of the local school district, as well as incorporate this brainwashing stuff. In a related matter, I'd like to inform you people out there that are watching that Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld signed into law the Gay Youth Rights Law. And it's funny because they had a quote from a fellow classmate of mine at UMass Amherst. His name is Chris Muther. Now this guy is to the left of Mao Zedong, And I enjoyed taking over the Senate and the student government when we were over there from the likes of him. And this is the same person who was probably involved and implicated in the storming of the Republican Club office at UMass while I was out there, because we dared to question the validity of funding homosexual groups that we thought were not in good taste and in good use of our money. This person named Chris Muther says that, you know, I felt sort of subhuman when, you know, when the people were subjecting to so-called discrimination, and that this is going to be just a wonderful cure-all for homosexual students in the public education system. Bill Weld's hand-picked appointee, David LaFontaine of the State Coalition of Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights, says that the atmosphere of verbal abuse denies gay students their rights to an education. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the First Amendment to the Constitution says you are entitled to freedom of speech. Also, I encourage you to take a look at Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 272, Section 34. 272, Section 34. It's in the Danvers Library. It's in most of the libraries here in Massachusetts. Take a look what the Massachusetts General Laws have to say about the act of which Governor Bill Weld wants to protect and actually promote in the public school systems, even with your tax dollars. In my opinion, you ought to pull your kids out of public school if you can, because what they're trying to do, it just says it right here, they're going to indoctrinate anybody and everybody who goes into their schools into accepting the homosexual lifestyle. Now, that is anti-Christian bigotry. Bill Weld is an anti-Christian bigot, and I'm sorry if people don't like that. It's just the way I see things, and it's going to increase not only at the state level, but at the federal level. At the federal level, Goals 2000 was passed by the House of Representatives. It's nothing less than a national outcome-based education program, which again incorporates into law some of this wacko stuff that Bill Weld's doing, some of this weirdo stuff that outcome-based education is producing here in Danvers by Superintendent Sanasano. And our Congressman Peter Torkelson voted for Goals 2000, which is part of this New World Order, United Nations brainwashing of America. It undermines, again, parental control and authority. And Peter Torkelson doesn't really have too much respect for the Constitution, because if he did, he would realize this, that the Founding Fathers made zero provision for federal government intervention in the area of education. There's no reason for them to be there. It's unconstitutional. But your average congressman, including our own, Peter Torkelson, does not follow the Constitution because they choose not to do so. You need to do something about that. Okay, Nelson Benton of the Salem Evening News wrote an article about family values. I think that's great. Unfortunately, Nelson Benton of the Salem Evening News supported a pro-homosexual, pro-abortion candidate named Sally Kearns. And if you're going to be promoting these lunatics who have no respect for Judeo-Christian values, and you want to talk about family values at the same time, in my opinion, you're borderline hypocritical, Mr. Benton, and everyone needs to be on guard for these liberal media personalities who are so-called, you know, picking up on family values. These people say one thing and they do another. These are the people that support abortion on demand. They support gay rights, and it's an insidious attack on our families. And, you know, don't believe everything you read, because these people, like, for instance, the Associated Press. You know how, if you take a look at every single byline, most of them that appear in the Boston Herald, you know, Salem Evening News, whatever, take a look at the very end. It'll say AP, that's Associated Press. Notice how they always talk about right-wing neo-Nazis over in Germany, and, you know, right-wing conservatives over in Russia, which are actually communists. That is something that they do deliberately to confuse the political spectrum. A couple of shows ago, we had a political spectrum that we showed is not circular, but actually it's a straight line. On the right, you have no government. The left, you have full government. Fascism or Nazism is nothing more than National Socialism. That's an acronym for Nazi. Now, you need to know that, because liberalism is almost equated with Nazism. It's on the same side of the scale. So you see, neo-Nazism and fascism are completely closer to liberalism than conservatism, which I advocate, which advocates limited government and minority rights. That's what the Founding Fathers gave us. They were worried about the tyranny of the majority. So whenever you read that in AP, know they're trying to dupe you and they're trying to fool you. So watch out. You got to use your mind. Okay. If you would like an alternative to the AP psychobabble, I encourage you to read, among others, Pat Buchanan, but especially Walter Williams, a black professor at George Mason University. Wonderful columnist. He's great. He rivals Pat Buchanan. He's a great guy. Also, we wish Pat Flynn the best of luck in his lawsuit against Helen Gifford and the North Shore Sunday. It is an anti-Christian, bigoted newspaper. She said that I hate women. That is really sick, and she deserves to lose. I would like to, at this point, talk to you about the people who have called in and congratulated me and have supported me. I really appreciate that a lot. There's been one or two people who I didn't get back to. I think I lost your numbers or whatever. I'm sorry about that. I haven't forgotten about you. Please give me a call back again, because I don't know who you are. It's 777-9340, 777-9340. My name's Ted Marvelius, obviously. Just call me up again. I'd love to talk to you. Even if you haven't called before, please, pro or con, feel free to leave a message or whatever. Include your telephone number if you can. I'd like to read to you a quote. I know I'm rushed, but we want to get to our guest, Joe Spina. From Alexander Pope: whoever hopes a faultless tax to see, hopes what ne'er was, is not, and ne'er shall be. Never shall be. Okay, so that's some words of wisdom for you. Another quote that I'd like to read is the philosophy which basically I espouse, and it's a quote from Charles Adams from the book For Good and Evil. The basic concept of federalism, that's what our founding fathers gave us, is set forth in the 10th Amendment, which provides the federal government can do only what is expressly authorized to do in the Constitution. All other political powers are reserved to the states and to the people. Okay, if it's not in the Constitution, if the federal government is not given a specific authority to do something, they have no right to do it. So you got the IRS, the BATF, the EPA, OSHA, all of these federal agencies which consume tax dollars, which limits your freedom through taxation and through regulations, are all unconstitutional. And unless we have constitutionalist congressmen out there that want to try to abolish these agencies outright, including the federal income tax, which we don't need, then you're just going to continue to suffer, and the economic mobility of your average American is going to go like this, along with the sovereignty compromising measures such as NAFTA, which Peter Torkelson supported. That is, again, unconstitutional because it gives our independence away from our Congress and to unelected bureaucrats. Okay, the Brady bill passed. Okay, and of course, Nelson Benton was just salivating, and happy days are here again. The unfortunate thing is, when the Second Amendment gets violated, historically, government tyrannies arise. A wonderful book and a wonderful organization called Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, we're going to have them on hopefully very soon, has done a historical analysis of the 1968 gun control law, which is basically the biggest one since the Brady bill. It's that law, that gun control law, is verbatim the 1938 Hitler Weapons Confiscation Act. So what we're doing here in America is what the Germans, the Nazis, did to their people back in the 30s. So the next time you see Sarah Brady and Handgun Control Incorporated on TV, the next time you see Nelson Benton railing against the Second Amendment, the next time you see your Congressman Peter Torkelson doing yet another flip-flop on the Constitution by supporting the Brady bill, the next time you see all of these gun control measures being pushed by Bill Clinton, like federal licensing of handguns, the next time you see all of that, note this, that besides violating the Second Amendment, which says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Above and beyond complete violation of the Second Amendment, what they're going to be doing, in effect, is establishing a dictatorship in this country, and you're going to have what's what is basically going to be a Holocaust. Because when you take away citizens' rights to keep and bear arms, the government is just going to come after you. It's just the nature of government. And they're going to come and deprive your liberties, and you will be just like those people in Tiananmen Square, absolutely helpless. And you have to take into consideration that as people like Peter Torkelson, Nelson Bennett of the Salem Evening News, et al., and Bill Weld, who did another flip-flop like a good liberal Republican, they are responsible. You have to realize that they are responsible, and what they are doing is an insidious attack on your civil liberties and civil rights, and it is very, very sad. Let's take a look at something that really kills Americans. This is a statistic of American casualties concerning wars and different catastrophes here. The cross represents 50,000 people killed. Now, you'll notice that the Revolutionary War is very small. Civil War, there's a decent amount of crosses. But as your eyes scan the page, you'll see a whole slew of crosses down at the bottom. Now, can you guess which war that was? It's the war against the unborn. And that cost us, this says 18 million, this is dated. It's 25 to 30 million little girls and little boys slaughtered because of an unconstitutional decision called Roe v. Wade, okay? And keep in mind that Peter Torkelson supports the Freedom of Choice Act, and this is what happens when politicians squish out. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Hi, I'm Jim Morose with today's commentary. Today I'd like to discuss diversions. I can remember back when I was a kid, the great snowball diversion. What used to happen is the kids would get together and the attackers would lob lofty snowballs up in the air. As we dutifully watched them, we were quickly pummeled with line drives to the stomach. But basically those types of pranks and physical diversions are easily spotted and avoided by, people that have been victims and have or experienced similar ploys and pranks. Of course, in today's high-tech enlightened society, the same ploys and pranks have just been raised to a higher playing field. Why have the American people been drawn and quartered into little holier-than-thou camps which are at psychological civil war? Why have these issues been hashed and rehashed by the media, our leaders, ourselves, with inconsistent results? There are wins and losses for every camp, at every level, local, state, and federal. I don't have a scorecard, but just let me list some of the teams in the Let's Divide America into Camps League. We've got the pro-abortionists against the anti-abortionists. We have gay rights and anti-gay rights. We have environmentalists and anti-environmentalists. We have animal rights and anti-animal rights. We have gun control and anti-gun control. We have OBE and anti-OBE. I could go on and on with the pro this and the anti that, but the bottom line is we have all fallen for a game of mental diversion. We are all so consumed with and bombarded by these fabricated issues. Look out, America, the line drives are coming. What do I mean? The prize in this game that we're playing today is our Constitution. Let me explain. If you live in Massachusetts, then your elected state senator has voice voted yes to amend the United States of America's Constitution to allow us to submit our national sovereignty so that we can join a global government. Ladies and gentlemen, let me quote my favorite character, Gomer Pyle. Surprise, surprise, surprise. I was surprised. This resolution was adopted and signed May 13th and submitted by our very own Senator Fred Berry. If you want a copy of it, call your state senator, and it's right there. It was passed May 13th, 1992, by unanimous voice vote, which, by the way, was reported in this newsletter, which is put out by the American Movement for World Government, a newsletter entitled World Peace News. It was published October 1993. I was surprised because it took 1 year and 7 months for this to slip out of the media machine. Nor radio, nor newspaper, nor television, nor your elected officials bothered to make sure that you knew that this information, you know, that this resolution was enacted and passed. Why? After 1 year and 7 months, I heard a small little blip on the radio. So I called Senator Berry's office and got a copy. This was just at the end of December. But what does this really mean to join a one-world government? I really don't know, but I do know that our current U.S. senators, our U.S. congressmen, cannot control the federal budget. The deficit is out of control, so if they, whoever they are, or we, or whoever, add another level of government on top of our local, county, state, and federal, all I can see is more mismanaged government, out of control, and every government needs taxes. That's one more box on your paycheck. Local and state taxes, federal taxes, and world taxes. If you think things are bad now, wait till there's another level of government to contend with. And by the way, how will this all work? Again, I really don't know, but I do know that surrendering of the U.S. Constitution's sovereignty is in direct conflict with the oath of office, which states, I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States. Our Constitution has kept us a free nation for over 200 years. So why is it such a big secret that they've passed a resolution for us to join this government? Why hasn't this resolution hit the headlines in all the media? Radio, TV, newspapers, why aren't they proud of this fact? I don't know. I guess that the media is just too busy supplying ammo for the psychological civil wars. Finally, I would just like to end with a few quick quotes, some famous, some not so famous. And Norman Thomas, for many years, the U.S. Socialist President candidate proclaimed, the American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. And just a few more. Herman Dinsmore, foreign editor of the New York Times from 1950 to 1960, quoted, the New York Times is deliberately pitched to the liberal point of view. Walter Cronkite, news reporters are certainly liberal and left of center. Barbara Walters, the news media in general are liberals. Just want to scan quickly to a couple of more quotes. Benjamin Franklin, man will ultimately be governed by God or by tyrants. And Daniel Webster, if we abide by the principles taught in the Bible, our country will go on prospering. And John Adams, in conclusion, our Constitution was made up only for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. God bless you, and good night.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this portion of the Ted Marvelius America First Hour. Joining me is my guest, Joe Spina, formerly with WESX Radio. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Ted.
And what we're going to do today is just talk to you about some, political questions, your perspective on some issues, and also about the show that you were on, but apparently are not on anymore. And so, why don't
Too hot to handle.
Yes. Why don't you give us sort of an overview of what happened at WESX, the station that you were on with the radio talk show, and let our viewers know why you aren't on anymore.
Well, I really can't answer the latter part. I received a tremendous amount of mail from listeners. I didn't realize we had that many. They had some suggestions and theories. It's not the first time, by the way. I've been with WESX a number of years ago with Tracy Lawrence from Salem, an outstanding young lady, and she and I did before Claproot and Whitney became popular. As a matter of fact, I should be so bold as to say we were probably better than Clapproot and Whitney. She's certainly more attractive and far more intelligent. Makes more sense than Ms. Clapproot ever thought of making, but that's another issue. And we did that for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden, one Friday evening, we were told that that would be it. And you know, we're kind of burnt out by then, and so be it. It was said that there were political forces that drove us off the air because of our position and our stances and many of the things we were saying on WESX. And I suspect there was some truth to that. A year went by, and I was asked to come back to WESX and did a show on my own for a couple of years, and we hit all bases. But you know, our point of view is something like yours, Ted. I mean, you're not going to get a lot of kudos. The North Shore Sunday's not going to talk about Ted Maravelis in nice terms. I mean, you're not Sally Kern, are you? I mean, you're not a left-winger, are you? I mean, you know, very seriously. Yeah. You're not politically correct. What I watched of your show in the green room, I found fascinating because it dealt with truth. And of course, you know, truth is something we don't talk about in American media today. We have to satisfy the imagined reality of many people out there, or the ones who make opinion. So I took that type of attitude to my radio show, and I wanted to talk about things people didn't want to talk about. I wanted to say that this political correctness is insanity, and I see it was like reading Alice in Wonderland. That's actually what my show was. You know, what's up is down, what's sideways is not sideways, black is white, pink is magenta. I don't know. I mean, it was a crazy, insane world of crazy rabbits. And I was saying, let's make some sanity. Let's make some sense out of this whole thing. And that's what we try to do. I suspect you're trying to do the same.
We're trying, Joe, and what's discouraging to me is that it seems as if conservatives or those who challenge the politically correct view of things in the media are coming upon increasing attack by legislation and by fellow media personalities, owners of radio stations, owners of TV stations. You know, this thing with the fairness doctrine, this fairness bill that
that's
they
to shut off Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah,
I mean, let's be upfront about the whole thing. Yeah, supposedly one conservative voice that made it in the United States big, Rush Limbaugh. As soon as it became successful, they just said, wait a minute, we can't have this. I mean, is it possible that somebody out there could be making some sense and people are buying into it? So let's shut them down. Let's call it the fairness doctrine. Look, there isn't a major newspaper, there isn't a major television station, there isn't a major studio in Hollywood that isn't owned and controlled by liberals. You hear that, folks? Forget the stuff about newspapers and big business. Take a look at what they're talking about. Watch PBS sometime. Watch Channel 4, 5, 7, any of them. I mean, they're ultra-liberal. They say Boston has conservative talk show host. Who? Rush Limbaugh is on? Yeah, he is. Tom Leykis is a liberal. Marjorie, I mean, she's in left. I mean, she's left of Stalin, for God's sakes. Very seriously, I mean, she's an ideologue of the first order. Yep. Who do you have in Boston that's so liberal? Howie Carr is a non-ideologue. That's right. He's just, I don't know what you call him, an anti-anybody. Right. So you don't have him. Do you have Pat Buchanan in Boston? Do you have Ollie North in Boston? Do you have Gordon Liddy in Boston? These are nationally syndicated conservatives. They're not playing in Boston.
Right. I do know WACP does carry Buchanan, but that's northern Massachusetts. Also, primarily, if you want to listen to a conservative, you have to get shortwave radio, and they have a lot of decent conservatives on there. But the point being is that this movement to crush Rush Limbaugh, who is not an ultra-conservative, he's a conservative, he's not an ultra-conservative. This movement to do away with conservatives in the media, isn't this reminiscent of pre-Nazi Germany?
No, it's reminiscent of that which the liberals like to call McCarthyism. What is it in effect is the liberals are out to shut down any dissent whatsoever to the orthodoxy. And it's in the, it's in our universities and any place else. Look, Limbaugh makes fun. He pokes fun of them. They don't like that. They have no sense of humor. That's number one. There are a number of people out there who are trying to say, look, we are not all equal. You know, we're different human beings. That's the way it should be. And what we must, time. We do some time frames. That's okay. And are we going over time?
Oh no, I just want to know how much time we have, because I mean, if it was up to me, we'd be here for 2 hours.
No, what you would let me retract because my train of thought went off a little bit. You were talking about outcome-based education
Right.
in your commentary, and I thought it made a great deal of sense. But outcome-based education is not just limited to education. It's outcome-based on all matters. Whether you're in the military, whether you're in industry, they want to deny the fact that we have individual differences, and everything's a leveling effect. So if we don't like the outcomes, if, for example, a Chinese person is a better gymnast than a Caucasian, well, we don't like that. That's unacceptable to the liberal orthodoxy. So what you do is you defy human nature and you make the outcomes so that they both perform at the same level, whether that is against nature or not. I told you about an old Greek philosopher, a king from your old heritage, who when he found something that was too long, he would cut their arms and legs to make them conform to a standard. And if they were too short, he'd put them on a bed to stretch them. And that's what we do today, and it makes no sense.
Well, you know, the forces of political correctness are real, and the unfortunate thing is, specifically you as a school teacher, if you're a student trying to grow up in an age like this, if you're a young boy or girl, if these PC forces which are infiltrated the media and the teaching profession, if they're telling you one thing about America's history and about how we ought to live, how are they to know what is actually what we would call non-PC, or the right way, the way that people in your generation and before were taught, the right things, the good things and the wholesome things? How are they to know? How are they to know what is real history? They're teaching them rehistory, as you know. How are they to get their moorings about the Constitution and about the way that life used to be in America? What's the answer?
Well, the Constitution is not one of the great documents in my mind. I mean, many people say it is. It's rules, just like playing Monopoly. You have a bunch of rules, and you pass go, you get $200. That's all the Constitution is. You can change it any old time, right? I mean, to me, that document that's important is the Ten Commandments, or any facsimile thereof. If you were to abide by those 10 precepts, then we'd have a wonderful world. We don't need all of these layers of laws and rules and the rest of it. They don't make any sense.
James Madison, the person who wrote the United States Constitution, is called the Father of the Constitution, said that, something to the effect that we have based our whole civilization on the concept of whether or not we can abide by the 10 Commandments. He says if we abide by the 10 Commandments, then we're going to be a great nation. I mean, this whole thing of separation of church and state is really a hoax that has been put on us by liberal and revisionist historians.
Tell me
and
what
media
Jefferson
types.
said about God.
Well, you
have a quote there. Fear God. I'm not seriously, because I love that quote.
Thomas Jefferson said this, and mind you, the liberals say that Thomas Jefferson gave us separation of church and state, and so therefore they kick out God in the Bible and 10 Commandments. Stone v. Graham in 1980 said that the 10 Commandments were prohibited because of the Founding Fathers. Well, Thomas Jefferson obviously was one of them, and he said, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I realize that God is a just God, and his justice cannot sleep forever." I mean, this is a guy who was supposed to be a deist and a guy who totally did not want morality and the 10 Commandments in the public schools, even though he distributed Bibles as the school superintendent for the District of Columbia. You know, this revisionist history is rampant, especially here in the North Shore. And when we have a voice of reason, the rarity, when we have a voice of reason like you, unfortunately the plug gets pulled, and that really gets me mad. And that's why I wanted you to be on this show, because I know that there's a lot of people who are out there who loved your show, who weren't necessarily, really conservative, but they just liked your common sense view of things, on the issues. And, what can we do to stop this harassment of freedom of speech, of conscience? What can we do to get people like you back on the air?
Well, you notice I've avoided talking about the issue for most of the time. Thank you for leading me back into it. What can you do? I mean, the station received, as I mentioned, they were overwhelmed by phone calls and by letters from individuals I didn't know from all over, from Gloucester to Malden, and from all walks of life. So, management's free enterprise. It's a free country. If they choose not to associate themselves with a particular personality or perspective or point of view, and they lack the courage, then they're entitled to do that. I have no recourse. By the way, I don't want to be forced. I don't want to force someone to have to carry Joe Spina.
Right.
I want them to say, hey, here's somebody who has something to say. We might not necessarily agree, but he has something to say that makes sense. Look, I make no pretense. I come from, I graduated from high school in 1957, so I'm a Neanderthal. I've been described as a as a misogynist. I've been described as a racist. I've been described as a social reactionary by all people who I have a little respect for. So what do I care what they call me? I know who I am, and as long as I can play with my grandchildren and kiss my daughters and my son and enjoy life, that's all I care about. And I wish that everybody else would get along to the business doing the same thing. But nobody has the right to tell me that I must abide by a set of rules and regulations that make absolutely no sense. No one is going to tell me that black is white and white is black. It's that simple. And that's all I ask. So when I hear these liberals coming around and trying to tell me, for example, health care, one of the issues that you'll be dealing with, when someone tries to tell me how wonderful this is, and we're going to have universal access, and it's a constitutional right, I said, really? Well, thank you very much, but I have a pretty decent health care plan, as do 85% of you people, and frankly, I don't want to pay more for less. Now, you want to call me selfish? Call me selfish. But that's the way it is. If someone wants something, go out and work for it. That's what my dad did, and I suspect your father and your grandfather did. I remember going up to the Victoria Diner as a young boy, and they were working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, for I remember, you know, grinding out nickels and dimes. You know, somehow that's wrong. Yep. And you want to protect what you have. I can't buy that.
Well, you know, I agree with you. I do think that brings me back to the Constitution. See, if we just abided by that, we wouldn't have these assaults and intrusions by the federal government into areas which the Founding Fathers did not want us in. But again, it is predicated on their morality, their value system, which they have none. And the unfortunate thing is we have really weak churches, we have weak citizens. Bo Gritz calls the American people sheeple. You know, we have to realize what's at stake, and we need to see truth, you know, where it is exposed and where it comes to light.
People have difficulty with truth, Ted. They honestly do. Let me just say this. I was thinking of writing an essay the other day called America in Free Fall. And the reason why is I was out ill with the flu, so I got to watch television. Lo and behold, they had Lorena Babbitt, and Bobbitt, rather, and she is on trial, and yet you would think that her husband was on trial. They had reversed it. She is now the victim, even though the other guy was dismembered. That's number one. They have two brothers out in California who didn't get along with their parents, so shot them to death. And they had a hung jury on this, okay? Understand this. I said, wait a second, is something wrong with my reasoning here? Now, follow it one step further. They turn around and some guy gets whacked with a brick and stomped on that we all see, and the individuals, by and large, were acquitted. Am I correct in that analysis?
Correct.
So take a look what's happening in our judicial system. It doesn't make sense. They turn around, they say, there's nothing to Watergate, or what, I'm sorry, that's a slip, White Watergate, there's no allegations. I said, what? I mean, a reasonable person analyzing the facts as they now stand would come to a reasonable conclusion that something was amiss there. In the middle of it was Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Reasonable people would come to that conclusion. No, they hide behind the legalisms of the Constitution, you see? That's why I don't have a great deal of respect for the way the Constitution is being applied today.
Right, because what it is, and I'm telling you, it's revisionist history. They're lying. They're not abiding by the Constitution. They're lying about it, and they're just using it just to cover up their evil deeds and their misdeeds. And I'm telling you, unless people get access to the Constitution, read it, read the Federalist Papers, and really start to understand where we were and where we're going, then I think we're in trouble. And that's why media, conservative personalities, and common sense personalities are extremely important. And that's why I say it. I don't agree with everything Rush Limbaugh says. I mean, I'm sure you might not agree with everything I say. But the fact of the matter is, we need alternative views out there, period, because the PC dominance, the politically correct dominance of the Salem Evening News, for instance, of the Danvers Herald, is so gross and so authoritarian, it's so immense that unless we break through it, we're in big trouble, because the kids don't know anything today, not to mention the parents. But I mean,
look, no one has any courage today. Nobody wants to rock the boat. As long as they've got a little piece of their world, they're going to continue with it. Look, we have a nation that is ripping apart, fragmenting out there under the guise of multiculturalism. People are identifying by their gender, they're identifying by their racial composition, instead of identifying as being part of the human race. And that's the problem today. We allow things, and we allow Howard Stern on radio and on TV. I mean, you know, he's basically I don't know, pornographer. Or is that maybe too strong? Certainly obscene. I saw did you see the cover of Vanity Fair this month? On the cover of Vanity Fair is one Roseanne Barr wearing negligee in some type of, I suspect, erotic pose. I would say that there was a great example of the violation of the obscenity clauses in American law. If anybody wants to know what's gross and grotesque, take a look at the Vanity Fair cover of Roseanne Barr in negligee. And yet we celebrate that as being...
Well, I mean, that's only consistent with Janet Reno's push to legalize child
courage.
pornography.
She has no courage. That woman, I said on my radio program at Waco that she blew it, that she killed
you better believe it.
75, 80 people, whatever it was. And everybody says, how can you say that about her when she came out and she used it? Everybody forgets. She says, well, the reason why we went in because there was child abuse and sexual abuse going on. Have you heard that one lately?
Oh, no, I knew that from the start.
Well, that's what she said.
Child abuse? What's the ultimate of child abuse? Burning them to death by government fiat? I mean, that's great.
Have you ever listened to her? My two favorite people in the Clinton administration are Janet Reno, who I think is a joke, and Jocelyn Elders, who is a pediatrician, by the way. I want to know how she I want people to verify that she graduated from college. I mean, the woman cannot string two sentences together. Did you ever listen to her?
No, actually, I have never.
She makes absolutely zero sense.
Really? I mean, this enlightened member of the administration who wants to give condoms
yeah, she wants to legalize drugs.
And legalize drugs. Yeah, it surprises me.
Which I don't mind, by the way. But my son is not dealing in it. You know, her son is dealing in it, and she wants to legalize it. So I can wonder why.
A little bit of our self-motive there. In my opinion, Joe, Janet Reno really is a murderer. People ought to know that that Waco incident is just a precursor of what is to happen to gun owners who want to preserve their Second Amendment rights. It is sick, and when you have people like Nelson Benton just ripping the Second Amendment away, I just think that he's also partially responsible for what happened in Waco and all these people who have no idea what the stripping of the Second Amendment will do to this country.
Do you own a gun?
I pursue my Second Amendment privileges.
But do you have one?
I
don't. Yeah. Not that I necessarily care. Although lately I've been really seriously thinking about going down and getting one, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. It's not a question of Second Amendment. I don't care what the Second Amendment says. It doesn't say. If I want a gun, I want a gun. It's my right as a human being. Forget about the Second Amendment.
Correct.
That's number one. But this world is so insane and so crazy now that law-abiding citizens that don't arm themselves are foolish. It's a matter of just survival. And we are at that point where we have a barbaric society out there. Throw civilization out the window. Take a look at popular culture. Do you call American popular culture civilized?
Not at all.
Do you call what's happening in our inner cities civilized? Those things which we feature and hallmark as our societal goods, are they civilized? And I say, in a barbaric society, the one thing you need is protection. In this day and age, that's a gun. Now, they may say that's wrong. I say it's okay. I think it's right. Go to Washington, D.C. You were showing figures of the wars, how many people were killed in the wars. I wish you had shown how many people are killed yearly in the American cities as a result of violence. And I'll guarantee you that it would put all of those numbers, with the exception of abortion, to shame.
Yes, you're right. And that's why, in my opinion, everyone ought to go out and at least get your FID card, which enables you to have a rifle or a shotgun. It's really $5. You just go down to the police station and get one. Now, license to carry is much more involved. You have to take a course and all that. I do recommend it, everyone, because the Brady bill is going to do this.
Nothing.
Well, it'll do this. It'll say if a woman is being stalked by someone who is, you know, someone that wants to kill her, she knows it. She wants to go buy a gun because tomorrow, you know, her former husband or whatever is going to kill her. Then that person, that girl has to wait. That woman has to wait. What is it? I don't know. Is it 7 days or 2 weeks?
5 days and nationally, right, on the Brady bill.
Yeah, now that will result in her being killed, and that's murder, and anyone who voted for the Brady bill, in my opinion, is a de facto murderer, because women are going to be raped and killed because of the Brady bill, and Peter Torkelson voted for it, and I just can't understand.
Well, I don't know if I go that far and to make that. You know, I agree with you. Well, Peter Torkelson doesn't know where he's at any longer. That's a different issue. But women, you know, my understanding is women, and here I go again, women's choice of weaponry is not guns. They like knives, don't they? Knives and poison and snakes. Right? Then they use the asps. Didn't Cleopatra use the asp? And they like poison. And I mean, how do they get rid of or scissors, or knives, or whatever. I don't know.
Well, you know, they should have a
Look.
right to own a gun, you know.
Look, you know, the world is gone. Not the world, but that country is gone insane, and it needs to come back on track. Fortunately, have you noticed that Dan Quayle all of a sudden is right?
I know.
Have you know? I mean, what's happened? Have you noticed the economy is booming now? I thought we were in terrible shape, the worst shape we've ever been in, and certainly it isn't because of the policies of the Clinton administration, because they haven't kicked in yet.
Right.
These are all the policies of the last 12 years.
The first 8 being the best.
Well, Ronald Reagan. See now, why has Ronald Reagan been why is he? Why has the popular culture, you talk about revisionist history, why are they trying to paint him out to be a terrible president?
Well,
He's probably one of the 5 best presidents we've had ever.
Because he dared to cut taxes ever so slightly.
No, I think it's because he dared to take a position and hold to it,
Yeah.
and not get a hernia like Bill Clinton. I mean, Bill Clinton is the first of in my view, he's the first president that was elected from a dysfunctional family. I mean, take a look at his background.
Yeah.
He's got a half brother that he didn't even know he had by his original father. Then he has a half brother, Roger, who's doing a little coke, right? A mother that loved gambling and had 4 husbands. I mean, God, nothing personal. I understand there's some dysfunctional families out there, but give me guys like Bill Saltonstall, whose family had credibility in what we would call class. You know, that's a nice word, but truly had it. Give me Bill Weld. You disagree with him, policy-wise, but would you disagree with his pedigree, so to speak?
No, I mean, I very much respect anyone who, you know, who comes from a well-educated background and something like that. But I think right is right and wrong is wrong. And Bill Clinton was a nightmare. And I can't understand who would vote for someone like, you know, him. Or...
Is there any legitimacy to pedigree, by the way, or are we being too aristocratic now? Is there something wrong with saying that people should have breeding?
Well, let's put it this way: the founding fathers included the election of senators by the state legislature. It wasn't a direct election from the people, and they wanted to do that because they wanted senators to be picked by a deliberative and wise body who, you know, they didn't want it to leave it open to the whims of the population. There is something to be said about the tyranny of the majority, the mass mob rule, because that is sometimes more antithetical and opposing to liberty than to have just a complete oligarchy and just have a few in control. But there's a happy medium. The founding fathers knew that. They did not want a democracy, they wanted a republic, representatives, people who were trusted in the community, who had brains, who had the education. They knew what was right and they knew what was wrong.
They also knew that democracy ultimately will lead to totalitarianism and authoritarianism.
Always has.
Right, throughout history.
Do you know that the Federalist Papers, now this is the document that was responsible for trying to push the Constitution to be ratified. They had some problems. A lot of people thought that the Constitution was too big of a central government, if you can believe that, way back then. So they came out with the Federalist Papers, John Jay, James Madison, I think Hamilton, and in it, specifically in many passages, they said that democracies have been absolutely awful and have always led to tyranny. I mean, it says it right there. I think the quote goes, they have been as violent in their deaths as they have been short in their lives.
Does anybody recall the official title of Soviet Union?
Union of Soviet Socialist Republic.
And I suspect that it's the People's Republic of China. And if you take a look at any of the titles, they're all democratic republics, right?
Yeah.
And they're all communist and totalitarian. Does anybody remember the French Revolution at all, how violent it was when you give power to the masses? Be very careful of that. You know, democracy is an imperfect system. Adolf Hitler, who you alluded to in your segment, was elected. He did not take power by a military coup. He was elected by the people.
That's right.
So you could argue that the German people liked his policies and he implemented them, which is perfectly okay in a democratic society. Now, I disagree with that, and I want everybody out there thinking that I approve of what Nazi Germany did.
Right.
But I'm saying he was elected and duly elected. What happens if we have a leader that's elected to take all people named Ted and put them in prison?
Well, without a constitution that is abided by, without protections of minorities, life, liberty, and property that the federal government must abide by, then we open ourselves up to complete, Holocaust, persecution, and retribution. And that's what's happening, in my opinion, here in America. I think Waco and the Randy Weaver fiasco were just two examples of an ever-increasing hostile federal government. I mean, the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, is nothing less than a Nazi-like Gestapo force just terrorizing
I think the IRS is the worst.
I agree.
I
The
mean,
IRS is unconstitutional.
You're guilty until you prove yourself innocent, right? The reverse of our whole judicial system. The other thing is this. Let me ask you something. The federal government doesn't bestow any rights. I have those rights. You people out there have all these rights. The government doesn't give them to you. Why do people keep thinking, well, the federal government, the Constitution gives me the right. What right? You have the right as a human being.
Good.
I don't understand it.
Well, that's the main difference between the U.S. Constitution and the United Nations Charter. The U.S. Constitution was predicated on the Declaration of Independence, which said we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights.
What happens when these liberals kill God, which they've effectively tried to do?
Well, that's the thing. They've done something different. They've transferred God from being God the Father into God the State. And as a result, we have godless governmental charters like the UN Charter, which says that rights can be just created by the United Nations and taken away at whim. It's beautiful, like their First Amendment. It's like, freedom of speech cannot be curtailed unless in national emergency or something like that. It's like...
Well, John Adams in the Alien Sedition Acts, he curtailed freedom. By the way, we all have freedom of speech, but there is. This is the thing we talk about: civilization and manners. You and I may speak a little differently when we're playing basketball and rubbing up against each other and banging each other around than we would in front of our mothers and our daughters and our girlfriends. I mean, there is a language that we speak in certain contexts and a language that we speak in other contexts. I don't think we understand those differences. We've blurred them. We say it's okay to speak, hey, yo, man, anyway. And I say, no, not at all. When you're in an academic environment, speak as an academician. You're with ladies, speak to respect to ladies, etc. If you're in a political environment, do so. If you have some cuss words on a football field and nobody can hear, that's a different issue.
Joe, what would you say to voters in 1994 about our state rep Sally Kearns, our governor Bill Weld, and our Congressman Peter Torkelson? Can you say, I want some of your comments on them.
In which order?
Anyone you want.
Let me just lump it all together. If people aren't out there telling you the truth, are afraid to state people say many things, their actions aren't even close to what they say. But, if they don't have core convictions, and if they're not truthful, and they have no sense of what the average person is up against, how can you vote for them? I mean, Sally Kearns has the foggiest idea what the average person in this world is dealing with. I mean, she's so locked into this feminist ideology, it's counterproductive. It's ludicrous. And, to say that she should be up there making laws that make no sense is crazy.
It's embarrassing.
It certainly is. When you take someone like Fred Berry, who, has he ever had a job? I know he's done pretty well financially, from what I understand. He's involved in all types of establishments from the Cape to the North Shore, I guess. I don't know. Where do these people earn so much, earning so little? I could never understand. If you're making 35 grand a year, how do you end up becoming a millionaire?
Power of government.
I mean, with jobs or what? I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's Fred Berry's, but I'm saying, think about these types of things. I mean, understand it. Bill Clinton never made more than $35,000 a year. Never owned a house. No wonder he doesn't worry about property taxes and the rest. He never had to worry about it. You get what I mean? Bill Weld has pedigree. So Bill Weld is well-nourished. Therefore, he can be extremely generous with someone else's money.
Isn't that generous, huh? That's not really,
this is what welfare state is.
It's confiscation. And I cannot believe that, Sally Kearns and even Peter Torkelson, they're all lauded by Howard Iverson of the Damage. It's like, it's almost
Howard's a decent guy, but he makes no bones about it. Howard is a liberal. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy Howard, and it is consistent for Howard to like Sally Kearns, to start liking Bill Weld, to like Peter Torkelson. Peter Torkelson understands something. Once upon a time was a conservative.
Oh, I know. I worked for him when he was a conservative.
Well, he metamorphosed. He went through a metamorphosis.
He sold his soul.
I don't know that. He might consider himself a monarch butterfly, that he went through this whole thing now. See, I don't agree with the personally with the social positions of the congressman. Mm-hmm. But that's another. Let me end it by saying this. and then we'll get hit by the homosexual community. I choose not to go out and beat up or slander homosexuals. You know, what they do in their life is okay with me. I guess it's not okay with me. It's just that I'm not going to go out of my way to make life difficult for them. On the other side of the coin, I am never going to say that it's an acceptable lifestyle and that it's a deviant lifestyle. Absolutely. Now, if anybody tell me otherwise, to me, is going against reasoning. Now, they can argue all day long whether it's hereditary or whether it's environmental or combination thereof. The point is, it's not a lifestyle that one should espouse to. You know what's never said? Do you know what the life expectancy of a homosexual is, male homosexual?
40.
About 40.
Yeah.
Why don't they say that's a health hazard? Homosexuality is hazardous to your health.
That's politically incorrect. Even
Why?
so-called,
and even if you take AIDS out of the equation,
Right,
it's 40
I
years
know.
old. You know, factoring out AIDS. Something about the lifestyle is a health hazard.
Well, you know, the liberals don't want to come to terms that, you know, God has laid down certain specifications for civilization. If they don't want to follow them, they're going to lose civilization. We're going to become barbarians. That's just what happened to the Romans.
No, we are becoming barbarians.
Yeah.
We have already barbarized our country. That's the problem. There is no there are no standards. No one's out there saying, hey, this is what it is.
Well, Joe, let me interject quickly before we end. When I am talking to you, when you're seeing this video, we're going to have on the screen WESX's general manager and the owner, his name on, the address. If you believe that you viewers out there that Joe is a half-intelligent person who makes common sense, if you believe that he has the right to be heard, then make your views known by calling the radio station and by writing them and say, hey, I want to hear Joe Spina again. He sounds like he has common sense. I want some balance to your news program at WESX. And we hope that you will go out there and respond. And Joe, I personally, you know, will pray that you would just get some success out there and get on another radio station. I'd love to see you on TV. I appreciate you coming on as our guest, and thank you for being a voice of truth in the wilderness of political correctness.
Oh, wasn't that nice? Thank you for having me, Ted.
Thank you, Joe.
And listen, Ted, I don't know how much time we have. I'll make it very quick. I do television, and I'd like to have you on my show sometime, and we'll have some fun.
We will, and I appreciate the offer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we hope you have a good night. And again, I encourage you to read between the lines and give me a call if you have a chance. Thanks again.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a gold dry. The interest is up and the stock market's down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, a woman and the kids and the dogs and